There are moments in your life that function like a darkroom. You exist in a state of patient, suspended waiting, surrounded by the faint, acidic scent of potential. You can feel the shape of something important developing in the chemical bath of time, but the image is still submerged, indistinct, its true form a mystery. You learn to operate by touch, by the memory of light, navigating the darkness with a faith that what you're working towards will eventually emerge. And then, a single, sharp exposure to an unexpected light, and everything is fixed. The image is burned into permanence, and the room you thought was a space of infinite possibility is revealed to be just that, a room, with four walls, a door, and a single, unchangeable picture of your life as it is, and as it is about to become. For me, that exposure happened in the chaotic, pulsing red light of a party cup, under the drone of a playlist designed for manufactured fun, the moment I realized Liam was leaving, and I was a photograph I no longer recognized. The announcement had not been a surprise. Liam's life was a current, always pulling forward, while mine was more of an eddy, circling the same beautiful, familiar stones. He'd been talking about the San Francisco job for months, a lead architect position at a startup that promised to change the world, or at least the world of data management. It was the kind of opportunity that was made for him, for his brilliant, restless energy that always seemed to be searching for a bigger container to hold it. I had nodded along, offered the requisite encouragement, and helped him weigh the pros and cons with the detached logic of a good friend. I was his sounding board, his quiet harbor, the one constant in his vibrantly fluctuating life. It was a role I had perfected over the 7 years we had known each other, a performance of platonic stability that had become so second nature I sometimes forgot it was a performance at all. I had helped him pack his ambition into neat, little boxes, never once admitting that I wished he would unpack it all and stay. But here, at his going-away party, the reality of it finally broke the surface. The apartment he shared with 2 other guys we knew from university was thick with the humid press of bodies, the air a soupy mixture of cheap beer, perfume, and the collective melancholy of a Sunday evening bleeding into a Monday morning. People I vaguely knew from his work or our old swim team clapped him on the back, their laughter a little too loud, their smiles a little too wide. They were celebrating his future. I was mourning the loss of my present. I stood near the kitchen, nursing a lukewarm drink I had no intention of finishing, using the condensation on the cup as a focal point to anchor myself. From this vantage point, I had a clear line of sight to him. He was holding court by the balcony door, silhouetted against the bruised purple of the city twilight. He was laughing, a flash of white teeth in the dim light, his head thrown back as someone, a pretty brunette from his consulting firm, I thought, told a story. He looked like a painting of success, all sharp angles and easy confidence, the golden boy burnished to a high shine. And as I watched him, a strange, physical ache bloomed in my chest. It wasn't the dull, familiar pang of my long-held affection. This was something sharper, a feeling of tectonic shift, as if the very ground beneath my feet was splitting apart, revealing a chasm I had spent years pretending wasn't there. It was the realization that the quiet, carefully constructed world I had built around our friendship was about to be dismantled, board by board, and I had no blueprint for what to build in its place. The door he was leaning against, the one that led to the outside, to the rest of the world, suddenly felt like a profound and terrible metaphor. He was always standing at a threshold, ready to step through, while I was the one left inside, cataloging the emptiness of the room he'd just vacated. The music seemed to warp, the cheerful pop song slowing to a mournful dirge in my ears. The image was developing. In the chaotic red light of the party, I could finally see it clearly. I didn't just like my best friend. I was in love with him. And in 1 week, he was going to get on a plane and disappear from my life. And I had never, not once, given him a reason to look back. Our story began, as so many do, in water. We met on the university swim team, 2 bodies slicing through the chlorinated blue of the campus natatorium. Liam was a force of nature, a freestyle sprinter whose entire being seemed engineered for explosive forward motion. He moved with a kind of joyful violence, churning the water into a chaotic froth, his every muscle coiled with kinetic energy. He was loud, he was competitive, and he was undeniably brilliant in the water, a golden arrow shot from a bow. I was the opposite. A distance swimmer, my specialty was the mile. My practice was one of conservation, of rhythm, of finding a meditative state in the relentless repetition of strokes. I was quiet, methodical, my form economical and clean. Where Liam's swimming was a declaration, mine was a confession. We were, in the most elemental sense, oil and water. Or perhaps more accurately, the storm and the deep, quiet ocean beneath it. He noticed me not for my speed, but for my stillness. I had a habit of staying late after practice, long after the coaches had left and the boisterous energy of the team had dissipated. I would float on my back in the center of the vast, empty pool, the water holding me, the high ceiling of the natatorium like a cathedral dome above. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the sides and the distant hum of the building's circulation systems. It was my sanctuary, the only place my overactive mind truly went quiet. One evening, as I was lost in that liquid silence, his voice echoed across the cavernous space. "You look like you're trying to solve something." I startled, sinking a little as I turned my head. He was standing at the edge of the pool, still in his jammers, water dripping from the ends of his blonde hair onto the tiled deck. He wasn't smiling his usual cocksure grin. His expression was curious, almost soft. I didn't have a clever reply. I think I mumbled something about it being quiet. He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the still, dark water. "Yeah, it is." He sat down on the edge, his legs dangling in the pool, creating a series of concentric ripples that radiated out and eventually rocked me where I floated. He didn't say anything else for a long time. He just sat there, sharing the silence with me. It was the first time I had seen him in a state of repose. The frantic energy that usually surrounded him calmed to a low hum. It was in that shared silence, surrounded by the smell of chlorine and the vast, echoing space, that our friendship was born. He wasn't just the sprinter, the life of the party. He was also a person who understood the value of a quiet room. From that day forward, we became an unlikely pair. His gravitational pull drew me into the brighter, warmer parts of campus life I usually avoided, and my quiet steadiness seemed to offer him an anchor he didn't know he needed. We were a study in contrasts. His dorm room was a chaotic explosion of textbooks, clothes, and takeout containers. Mine was Spartan and organized, my camera equipment laid out with surgical precision. He dated a succession of bright, bubbly girls who seemed to be extensions of his own sunny disposition. I didn't date at all, preferring the company of my darkroom and the silent stories my photographs told. I became his confidant, the person he came to when the pressures of his engineering coursework became too much, or when his latest romance hit a snag. I would listen, offer quiet advice, and never judge. I was the stable shoreline to his relentless tide. It was during my sophomore year that I started taking photographs of him. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. As a photography student, I was always looking for subjects, for light, for moments of unguarded truth. And Liam was a gift. He was so unself-conscious, so alive in his own skin, that he was endlessly fascinating to me. I took pictures of him at swim meets, not just the explosive start off the block, but the quiet moment before, his eyes closed, his face a mask of concentration. I took pictures of him laughing with our teammates, the sunlight catching the gold in his hair. I took candid shots of him studying in the library, his brow furrowed, chewing on the end of a pen. My camera became a shield, a way for me to look at him, really look at him, without having to explain the intensity of my gaze. The darkroom became my confessional. Under the safe, ruby glow of the safe light, I would watch his image emerge from the blankness of the paper. There, in the chemical trays, I could admit the truth to myself. I could see the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I could linger on the curve of his neck, the strong line of his jaw. The photographs were evidence of a feeling I was too afraid to acknowledge in the bright light of day. They were beautiful, and they were heartbreaking. Each perfect print was another brick in the wall I was building around my own heart. a beautiful prison of my own making. I was documenting a love I was certain would never be returned, creating a museum of a friendship that I desperately wanted to be more. I told myself it was art, but it was just longing, developed and fixed in silver gelatin. He loved the photos. He didn't see what I saw, of course. He saw a record of his life, captured by his talented, artistic friend. He marveled at the way I caught the light, the composition, the fleeting expressions. "You make me look better than I do in real life," he'd say, laughing. And I would just smile, a quiet, aching twist of my lips. "I just photograph what's there," I'd reply, and the truth of that statement was a secret I kept locked away, another undeveloped roll of film in the back of my mind. He framed one of the prints, a black and white shot of him just after a race, water streaming down his face, a look of exhausted triumph in his eyes, and hung it on his wall. Seeing it there, a piece of my secret heart displayed so openly in his life, was a special kind of exquisite torture. It was a constant reminder of the distance between the image and the reality, between the friend he saw and the man who was silently, hopelessly, in love with him. After we graduated, our dynamic didn't change, it only solidified. He dove headfirst into the demanding world of software consulting, a job that sent him flying across the country and rewarded his kinetic energy with deadlines and high-stakes projects. I found a small apartment with a second bedroom I could convert into a proper darkroom and started a fledgling career as a freelance photographer, shooting portraits, small weddings, and whatever else paid the bills. My life remained a quiet, deliberate composition. His was a flurry of motion. Yet, our friendship remained the anchor point for both of us. He would call me from airport lounges and lonely hotel rooms, his voice a familiar comfort against the backdrop of transient spaces. When he was home, my apartment was often his first stop. We would fall back into our easy rhythm, ordering takeout, watching old movies, the frantic pace of his life slowing to match the quiet hum of mine. I was the place he came to decompress, to be still. I treasured it. I treasured him. And I kept my secret locked away, safer than ever, because now there was more to lose. The friendship was no longer just a college bond. It was one of the foundational structures of my adult life. To risk, it would be to risk everything. The shift began subtly, a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. It started about a year before the going-away party, after his breakup with Catherine. She was a lawyer, sharp and ambitious, and for a while, it seemed like Liam had finally met his match. From my perspective, their relationship was a series of elegantly catered parties and intense, scheduled weekends. It looked polished, successful, like an advertisement for modern love. But when it ended, it didn't just end, it shattered. Liam didn't come to me with the usual post-breakup analysis, the rehashing of arguments and misunderstandings. He just showed up. It was a Tuesday night, close to midnight. I was in my darkroom, carefully agitating a tray of developer, when I heard a soft knock on my apartment door. It was too late for a casual visitor, and my heart gave a little lurch of anxiety. I wiped my hands, navigated the cluttered hallway, and peered through the peephole. It was Liam, standing there under the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He wasn't looking at the door, but at his own shoes, his shoulders slumped. I opened the door immediately. "Liam? What's wrong?" He looked up, and his eyes were hollowed out, the usual bright spark extinguished. He looked like a traveler who had walked for 1,000 miles and found himself no closer to his destination. "It's over," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual musicality. "With Catherine, oh, Liam. I'm so sorry. Come in." I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked past me into the living room and sank onto the couch as if his bones had suddenly turned to lead. He didn't take off his coat. He just sat there, staring at the blank television screen. I didn't know what to do. The usual script didn't seem to apply. Asking what happened felt intrusive. Offering a drink felt trivial. So I just sat down in the armchair opposite him, creating a space of quiet expectation. For nearly an hour, we sat in silence. The only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched in his lap. He wasn't just sad about a breakup. He was adrift, unmoored from something he thought was an anchor. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy. It was all just a project. Our whole relationship. We were building a life like it was a piece of software. Milestones, deliverables, performance reviews. He gave a short, bitter laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She said I lacked emotional bandwidth, that I was unavailable. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a kind of desperate, genuine confusion. What does that even mean, Alex? I was there. I did all the things. I showed up. I didn't have an answer for him, not a real one. Because I knew, on some level, what she meant. Liam was always present, but he was rarely truly there. His energy was always directed outward, at the next goal, the next achievement. He inhabited his life, but he didn't always seem to feel it. I think I said something vague and comforting about how people say things they don't mean when they're hurting. But what I wanted to say was, I see you. I see the part of you that you keep hidden, the quiet, uncertain core you protect with all that noise and motion. But I didn't. I was his friend, his safe harbor. And safe harbors don't have jagged, hidden rocks of confession waiting below the surface. That night, he fell asleep on my couch, fully clothed, his face etched with an exhaustion that went far beyond a lack of sleep. I pulled the Afghan from the back of the chair and draped it over him. His breathing was shallow, troubled. I stood there for a long time, watching him, the familiar ache in my chest now twinned with a fierce, protective pity. The storm had finally broken, and he had washed up on my shore. That night marked the beginning of the ritual. It was not a conscious decision on either of our parts, but a gradual, organic shift in the architecture of our friendship. My apartment, which had always been a port of call for him, became his primary sanctuary. The breakup with Catherine had coincided with a brutal project at his firm, a months-long death march of coding and client management that left him frayed and hollowed out. He started showing up at my door most evenings, not with the boisterous energy of a visitor, but with the quiet, weary shuffle of someone coming home. He rarely called first. He would just appear, a ghost in a tailored suit, the exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin. "Hey," he'd say, the single word carrying the weight of his entire day. "Hey," I'd reply, stepping aside to let him in. "Rough one." He would just nod, dropping his briefcase by the door and collapsing onto my worn, comfortable couch. He wouldn't want to talk about his day. He wouldn't want to analyze his feelings. He just wanted quiet. He wanted the absence of expectation. I would put on a movie we'd both seen a dozen times, or turn on a mellow playlist, and I would go about my evening. I'd make dinner, or work on editing photos on my laptop, or just read a book in my armchair. I became a part of the scenery of his recovery, a silent, unobtrusive presence that asked nothing of him. More often than not, he would fall asleep within the hour, his head lolling to the side, his breathing finally deepening into a genuine, restorative rhythm. The first time he stayed the night, it was a matter of simple logistics. He had woken up on the couch around 2 in the morning, disoriented and stiff. I was still up, working in the darkroom. He stumbled into the hallway, blinking in the dim light. "What time is it?" he'd mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. When I told him, he groaned. "I have a 7 a.m. meeting. It's not even worth going home." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. "You can just stay here," I said, the words feeling both completely natural and seismically significant. "The couch is yours," he nodded, a wave of relief washing over his face. "Thanks, Alex. You're a lifesaver." He disappeared back into the living room, and I went back to my developing trays, my hands trembling slightly. It was such a small thing. A friend crashing on the couch. It happened all the time, in 1,000 apartments all over the city. But for me, it felt like a locked door had just been nudged open a crack. The knowledge of him sleeping just one room away charged the air in my small apartment with a strange, potent electricity. I could feel his presence through the wall, a steady, sleeping weight. This became the new normal. A few nights a week, I would find myself covering a sleeping Liam with a blanket. The couch, however, was not built for a 6'2" man, no matter how exhausted. He started waking up with a stiff neck, his back aching. He complained about it with a kind of weary humor, but I could see the genuine discomfort. The unspoken solution hung in the air between us for weeks, a possibility I was too terrified to voice, and he was, I assumed, too oblivious to consider. The boundary was the bedroom door. My room, my bed. That was a private space, a line we had never crossed. It was the last bastion of my carefully guarded platonic role. Then, one cold night in November, the plausible deniability arrived in the form of a faulty heating system in his building. He called me, his teeth chattering audibly. My apartment is an icebox. The landlord says it'll be days before they can get the part. There was a pause. I could hear the unspoken question hanging on the line. I felt my own heart begin to beat a little faster. Here it was, the moment of decision. I could offer him an air mattress, a pile of blankets. I could maintain the boundary. It would be the sensible, safe thing to do. But the image of him, exhausted and cold, huddled on my lumpy couch, was too much to bear. My desire to offer him comfort, a genuine, deep, and unconditional comfort, overrode my instinct for self-preservation. The words came out before I could stop them. Just stay here. You can take the bed. I'll take the couch. There was a beat of silence on his end. No, man, I can't kick you out of your own bed. That's insane. It's a queen, I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. It's big enough. It's stupid for one of us to sleep on the couch. The logic of it was sound, irrefutable. And yet, the implication of it sent a tremor through my entire body. I was inviting him into the most private space I had. He hesitated for another moment, and then a sigh of pure, unadulterated weariness came through the phone. Okay, he said softly. Okay, Alex. Thank you. That night, the ritual was transformed. He arrived with a small overnight bag, looking apologetic and overwhelmingly tired. We went through the motions of getting ready for bed in a strange, silent pantomime of domesticity. He brushed his teeth in my bathroom, using the spare toothbrush I kept for guests, a guest I never had. I gave him an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants to sleep in, clothes I had worn 100 times. Seeing him in them, his broad shoulders filling out the soft, faded cotton, did something strange to my breath. It was an intimacy so profound and so mundane it made my head spin. When it was finally time to sleep, we approached the bed like two diplomats navigating a delicate treaty. I got in on my side, the left side, the one closest to the door. I pulled the covers up to my chest and lay rigidly on my back, staring at the ceiling. A moment later, the other side of the mattress dipped. He slid in, careful not to touch me, and lay on his back as well. The space between us was a gulf, a no-man's land of unspoken rules and anxieties. It was only a foot of empty mattress, but it felt like a mile-wide canyon. Night, Alex, he whispered into the darkness. Night, Liam, I whispered back. Sleep, for me, was impossible. I was hyper-aware of every single detail. The subtle scent of his soap, clean and fresh. The sound of his breathing, deeper and slower than mine. The warmth radiating from his body across the small gap between us. I lay there for hours, my body tense, my mind racing. I was cataloging the sensory data of his proximity, trying to commit it all to memory. This was a fluke, a one-time event brought on by a broken heater. It would not happen again. I had to absorb every second of it. I was a photographer in a dark room, trying to capture a fleeting image before the light changed. Eventually, his breathing evened out into the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. Sometime around 3 in the morning, in his sleep, he rolled onto his side, facing away from me. The vast gulf between us remained, but the simple, unconscious movement felt like a concession, a slight relaxation of the treaty. I finally allowed myself to relax, just a fraction, and sometime before dawn, I fell into a light, restless sleep. The heater was fixed in 2 days, but the precedent had been set. The excuse was gone, but the need remained. His need for rest, for sanctuary. And my need, I was beginning to realize, for him. He didn't ask to stay in the bed again, not directly. It just happened. He would fall asleep on the couch, I would wake him, and he would stumble wordlessly into my bedroom and climb into his side of the bed. The pretense was gone. This was just what we did now. The bedroom door, once a firm boundary, was now perpetually left ajar, an invitation that was never spoken but always understood. The ritual evolved in increments, so small I could almost convince myself they weren't happening. The foot of space between us on the mattress began to shrink, from a foot to 6 inches, from 6 inches to a mere hand's breadth. It wasn't a conscious movement on either of our parts. It was the natural, gravitational pull of two bodies sharing a small space over time. One night, I woke up to find his hand resting on the mattress between us, his fingers just an inch from mine. I lay there, barely breathing, my entire being focused on that tiny gap of empty sheet. I wanted to close the distance, to lace my fingers with his, more than I had ever wanted anything. But I didn't. I was the quiet observer, the documentarian. I did not interfere with the subject. Another night, I woke to find we had both rolled onto our sides, facing each other in our sleep. His face was only inches from mine, relaxed and peaceful in the dim light filtering through the window. His breath was a warm, gentle puff against my cheek. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He looked so vulnerable, so unguarded. It was a look I had only ever seen in my photographs. To see it here, in person, so close I could count his eyelashes, was almost too much to bear. I was living inside one of my own secret images, and I was terrified that any movement, any breath, would shatter the illusion. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, and waited for the sun to rise. This became my life. My days were spent in the clear, objective light of my work, capturing other people's lives. My nights were spent in the dim, ambiguous twilight of my bedroom, navigating the silent, charged space between myself and the man I loved. The anxiety was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my life. Every night was a tightrope walk, a test of my restraint. I was so afraid of misinterpreting the signals, of reading my own desperate hope into his unconscious need for comfort. Was this just about sleep for him? Was I just a warm body, a convenient and safe place to crash? Or was there something else developing in the darkness between us? Something he was just as afraid to acknowledge as I was? The silence in that room was never empty. It was filled with the weight of every question I was too terrified to ask. It was a beautiful, agonizing ritual, and I had no idea how it was supposed to end. The crossing happened 3 nights before his going-away party. The reality of his departure had begun to settle over my apartment like a fine layer of dust, dulling the edges of everything. The ritual had taken on a new, desperate quality. It was no longer just about comfort. It was about borrowed time. Each night was one less night I would have. The unspoken tension in the room had become almost unbearable, a high-frequency sound only I could hear. We were both acutely aware of the ticking clock, though we never mentioned it. His boxes were packed. The plane ticket was booked. The end was no longer a distant possibility. It was an imminent, unavoidable reality. That night, he was later than usual. A series of last-minute handover meetings had kept him at the office. When he finally arrived, he looked utterly depleted, as if the very light inside him had been turned down to a flicker. He didn't even make it to the couch. He dropped his keys on the small table by the door, walked straight into my bedroom, and collapsed face down onto the bed, still in his work clothes. I followed him and stood in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of his back. He was so still. After a few minutes, I walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress, my hand hovering over his shoulder. "Liam," I said softly. He didn't move, but his voice was a muffled sound from the pillow. "I'm so tired." Alex, it wasn't a complaint. It was a confession, a simple statement of fact that held the weight of the entire universe. "I know," I said. "Get up. Get changed. You'll feel better." He groaned but slowly pushed himself up. He moved like an old man, his joints stiff, his movements labored. He went into the bathroom, and I heard the shower run. I took the opportunity to change into my own sleep clothes, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. Something felt different tonight. The air was heavy, charged with a finality that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, clarifying. When he came back into the room, he was wearing the familiar t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair damp and curling at the ends. He didn't get into his side of the bed. He just stood there, by the foot of the bed, looking at me. The dim light from the hallway cast long shadows across the room, making it feel like a stage set for a play whose ending I didn't know. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, a small, lost gesture. "I don't know." He walked over to the bed and slid under the covers. But instead of turning his back to me as he usually did, he lay on his back, staring up at the dark ceiling. I lay on my side, propped up on one elbow, watching him. The silence stretched on, thicker and more potent than ever before. It was no longer just the absence of words. It was the presence of everything we had refused to say for months, for years. I could feel it pressing down on us, a physical weight. His voice, when it came, was so quiet I almost missed it. "Alex." "Yeah." He turned his head on the pillow to look at me. In the near darkness, his eyes were wide and dark, pools of shadow. "What are we doing?" The question hung in the air between us, terrifying and vital. He had finally voiced the central question of my existence for the past several months. I had no answer. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the directness of the query. I could have made a joke. I could have pretended I didn't understand. I could have said, "Getting some sleep." It would have been so easy to retreat back into the safety of our carefully constructed ambiguity. But looking at his face, at the raw vulnerability there, I knew that the time for plausible deniability was over. The ritual had run its course. "I don't know, Liam," I whispered, and it was the most honest thing I had ever said to him. He held my gaze, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, maybe, but something else, too. Something like recognition. He slowly, tentatively, rolled onto his side, so we were facing each other again, just as we had been that one night weeks ago. But this time, we were both awake. This time, it was intentional. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his gaze searching my face as if he were trying to read a map in a foreign language. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it, a frantic drumbeat in the silent room. He lifted a hand, his movements slow, hesitant, as if he were afraid of startling me. He didn't touch me, not yet. His hand hovered in the space between us, a silent offering. And then, his voice was a thread of sound, almost breaking. "Would it be okay?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew what he was asking. He was asking for permission to cross the line, to shatter the ambiguity, to turn our silent, fragile ritual into something real and named. He was giving me the choice. I could say no. I could preserve the friendship, the safety, the quiet harbor. I could send him to San Francisco as just my friend. The image of the rest of my life, a series of quiet, lonely rooms, flashed through my mind. The dark room, the empty apartment, the space on the mattress beside me forever unoccupied. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned forward, closing the last few inches of space between us, and gently pressed my lips against his. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not hungry or demanding. It was the softest, most tentative touch, a question and an answer in one. It was a confession. His lips were soft, warm, and they trembled slightly under mine. It tasted of mint from his toothpaste and a deeper, indefinable taste that was just him. After a second that stretched into an eternity, he responded, a gentle pressure, a sigh of what felt like relief escaping his lips and mingling with my own breath. His hand, which had been hovering in the air, came to rest on my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin with an impossible gentleness. It was a touch that felt like coming home. We stayed like that for a long moment, not deepening the kiss, just letting the reality of it sink in. The crossing had been made. We were on the other side of the line, in a new and terrifying and beautiful country. When we finally pulled apart, we didn't speak. He just rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. The silence that returned was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a profound, fragile peace. In the darkness of my room, something had finally, irrevocably, been brought into the light. The morning after was a study in silence and absence. I woke slowly, drifting up from the first deep, truly restful sleep I'd had in months. The space beside me in the bed was cool. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow. The sheets still held a faint trace of his warmth and his scent, but Liam was gone. For a moment, a thick, disorienting panic seized me. Had I dreamed it? Had the sheer force of my own wanting finally manifested a phantom kiss in the middle of the night? I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. On my nightstand, next to my alarm clock, was a folded piece of paper. My name, Alex, was written on it in his familiar, sharp handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The note was short, brutally so. Had to run. Early meeting. See you at the party tonight. That was it. No mention of the kiss. No acknowledgement of the seismic shift that had occurred between us just hours before. The words were functional, logistical. They were the words of a friend, a roommate, not a man who had kissed you as if his life depended on it. The fragile peace of the night before shattered, and the familiar, cold anxiety rushed back in to fill the void. He was running. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He had crossed the line, and it had scared him so much that he had fled back to the safety of distance and plausible deniability. The note was a wall he had erected between us, and I was on the other side of it, alone in the wreckage of what I had, for a few brief hours, allowed myself to hope for. I spent the day in a fog of hurt and confusion. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar process of editing photos, but my focus was shot. Every image I looked at seemed to mock me. A smiling couple at a wedding, a child's unguarded laugh. It all felt like evidence of a world of simple, honest emotion that I was excluded from. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, analyzing it from every angle, like a detective examining a clue. Had I misread it? Had it been a mistake for him? A moment of weakness brought on by exhaustion and the impending move? The question, would it be okay, echoed in my head. It had felt so real, so vulnerable. But his absence, his silence, was a louder, more convincing argument. My phone remained silent all day. I typed out a dozen different text messages, ranging from the casual, "Hey, you okay?" to the direct, "We need to talk about last night." But I deleted every single one. I felt a profound sense of humiliation. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable, to meet his tentative advance with my own, and he had immediately retreated. I had shown him my heart, and he had pretended not to see it. The quiet observer had finally stepped into the frame, and in doing so, had apparently ruined the composition. The thought of facing him at the party that night filled me with a dread so deep it felt like nausea. When I arrived at his apartment, the party was already in full swing. The noise and the crush of bodies felt like an assault. I felt raw, exposed, as if everyone in the room could see my foolish, hopeful heart pinned to my sleeve. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, the cold kin a welcome anchor in my trembling hand, and found a corner from which I could scan the room. I saw him almost immediately. He was exactly where I had pictured him, in the center of the largest group, the sun around which all the other planets revolved. He was laughing, telling a story with animated gestures, a beer in one hand. He looked bright, happy, and utterly carefree. He looked like a man who was thrilled to be starting a new life. He looked like a man who hadn't had a life-altering kiss the night before. Our eyes met across the room. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in his expression, a flash of panic, of guilt, before it was gone, smoothed over by a practiced, charming smile. He gave me a small wave, a casual gesture that felt like a slap in the face. He was treating me like any other guest, another face in the crowd. He was putting me back in my box, the one labeled good friend, quiet observer. A hot, bitter anger, an emotion I rarely felt, surged through me. It wasn't just about the hurt anymore. It was about the disrespect of his cowardice. After everything, after months of sharing a bed, after the intimacy we had built in the silent language of trust and proximity, he was going to pretend it meant nothing. He was going to leave, and he was going to let that beautiful, fragile thing we had created die in the silence of his departure. I couldn't let that happen. For 7 years, I had been the quiet one, the passive observer. I had let him set the terms of our relationship, and I had built my life in the spaces he allowed me. But not anymore. The photograph had been fixed. The truth was out, at least for me. and I couldn't go back into the darkroom and pretend I hadn't seen it. I pushed myself off the wall and started walking towards him, my path cutting a straight, determined line through the shifting crowd. People moved out of my way, their conversations faltering as they registered the look on my face. I wasn't angry in a loud way. It was a cold, quiet fury, a focus so intense it created its own gravity. He saw me coming, and the smile on his face finally faltered. The people around him sensed the shift in energy, their laughter dying down as they looked from his suddenly pale face to mine. By the time I reached him, we were standing in a small, silent pocket in the heart of the noisy party. "Alex," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I need to talk to you," I said, my own voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. Now, he looked at the faces of his friends, a trapped expression on his face. "Man, can it wait? I'm kind of in the middle of—" "No," I said, the single word cutting through his excuse. "It can't wait," he swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at me for a long moment, and whatever he saw in my eyes must have convinced him, because he gave a short, jerky nod. "Okay." He turned to his friends, forcing a weak smile. "Hey, guys, excuse me for a minute. Be right back." He led me away from the group, through the crowded living room and down the short hallway toward the bedrooms. He didn't lead me to his room, which was full of coats, but to the small, quiet study at the end of the hall. He closed the door behind us, and the cacophony of the party was instantly muted, reduced to a dull, rhythmic thumping. We stood in the small, dark room, illuminated only by the faint glow of city lights from the single window. He wouldn't look at me. He stood with his back to me, his hands braced on a desk, his head bowed. He was a world away from the confident, laughing man he had been in the other room. Here, in the quiet, he was the same person I had seen outside my apartment door the night he broke up with Catherine, lost, small, and afraid. "What was that, Liam?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but now laced with the hurt I had been suppressing all day. "The note. The whole day? Acting like you don't even know me out there. What the hell was that?" He was silent for a long time. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with a shame that was almost painful to hear. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Alex, I'm so sorry. I panicked." "You panicked?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "You kissed me, Liam. You asked me if it was okay, and then you kissed me. And then you ran away and left a note that said, 'See you at the party.' That's more than panic. That's cruel." He flinched as if I had struck him. He finally turned around to face me, and in the dim light, I could see that his eyes were glistening. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know. I woke up this morning, and it was real. It wasn't a dream. And I lay there, and I looked at you sleeping, and I got so scared. I've been so confused for so long. Everything is a mess. My job, leaving, my whole life. And you're the one thing that makes sense. You're the only person I can breathe around." He took a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "These last few months, sleeping here, it's the only real rest I've had in years. It's the only time I haven't felt like I was performing, or failing, or trying to be something I'm not. And last night, that kiss, it felt more real than anything. And that's what scared me." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Because I'm leaving in 5 days, Alex. And I'm realizing that this, being here with you, is the only thing I don't want to leave. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to be that person. The one who feels that." His confession hung in the air, a raw, painful, beautiful thing. All my anger dissipated, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't being cruel. He was just as lost as I was. He had spent his whole life in motion, running toward the next goal, and he had finally run into a feeling so powerful it had stopped him in his tracks, and he didn't know how to stand still. He was the unknowing initiator, and he had finally initiated himself into a truth he wasn't prepared for. I closed the distance between us, stepping into his personal space until I was standing right in front of him. I didn't touch him. I just wanted him to see me, to see that I wasn't going to run. "So you don't do anything," I said softly. "You don't have to know what to do with it." You just have to not run away from it. From me. He looked down at me, his gaze full of conflict and a dawning, fragile hope. But I am leaving, I know, I said. But you're still here now. And with that, I reached out, took his hand, and laced my fingers with his. His hand was cold, but he gripped mine tightly, a desperate, anchoring hold. We just stood there, in the quiet room, holding hands, while the party raged on without us on the other side of the door. The conflict wasn't over, but the confrontation had led to a truth. And for the first time, it felt like a truth we might be able to face together. The party dissolved around us, a distant, fading echo. We didn't rejoin it. We stayed in that small, quiet study for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. We didn't talk much more. The raw honesty of Liam's confession had drained the air of the need for words. We just stood, holding hands, letting the reality of the situation settle. It was a fragile truce, not a resolution, but the silence was no longer one of anxiety and unspoken tension. It was a silence of mutual acknowledgement, of shared fear and of flickering, nascent hope. Eventually, the thumping bass from the living room died down, replaced by the sounds of people gathering their things, their voices loud with goodbyes. Liam finally stirred, his grip on my hand tightening for a moment before he let go. I should probably see people out, okay, I said. I didn't want him to go. I didn't want to be separated from him, not even by the few feet back to the living room. I was afraid that the fragile bubble we had created in this room would pop the second he stepped back into the real world. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, because he hesitated at the door. He looked back at me, his face etched with an emotion I couldn't quite name, a mixture of apology, determination, and a deep, soul-shaking sadness. "Don't leave," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Wait for me. Please," I just nodded. He slipped out of the room, and I was left alone with the ghost of his presence. I could hear his voice in the other room, the familiar, friendly cadence he used with everyone. But I could also hear the strain beneath it now, the effort it was taking him to perform this final act of social grace. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights, a glittering, indifferent tapestry. San Francisco. It was out there, somewhere to the west, a city of fog and hills and a new life he was supposed to be excited about. Was he still going? The question was a cold stone in my stomach. He had said he was leaving, but he had also said he didn't want to. I was caught in the space between those two statements, a space of profound uncertainty. It took another hour for the last of the guests to trickle out. I heard the final goodbye, the click of the apartment door, and then silence. A deep, profound silence that felt like the entire building was holding its breath. A few moments later, the study door opened. It was Liam. He looked exhausted, his social mask stripped away, leaving only the raw, tired man underneath. He leaned against the doorframe, not entering the room, just looking at me. "They're gone," he said. I know. We looked at each other across the room. The entire trajectory of our future seemed to hang in that space. All the big questions, the job, the move, what we were to each other, were present, but they were too large, too overwhelming to address head-on. Not yet. Instead, he asked a much smaller, more immediate question. "Can we just go home?" he asked, and the way he said home, meaning my apartment, my quiet, safe space, sent a pang of warmth through my chest. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go home." The walk back to my apartment was silent. The late-night city was quiet, the streets slick with a recent rain that made the streetlights shimmer on the pavement. We walked side by side, not touching, but I was intensely aware of the space between us, of the way his arm brushed mine with every other step. It was a comfortable silence now, a shared space rather than a dividing one. When we got back to my apartment, the familiar ritual began, but every step was imbued with a new meaning. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door. I locked the deadbolt. The small, domestic actions felt intentional, significant. He went to take a shower, and I went into my bedroom. I pulled back the covers on the bed. Our bed, I thought, and the words sent a jolt through me. I changed into my sleep clothes. When Liam emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, his hair dripping, he paused in the doorway. He looked at the bed, then at me. There was no hesitation this time, no pretense. This was not about a broken heater or exhaustion. This was a choice. He walked over to his side of the bed, dropped the towel, and slid under the covers. I got in on my side. For a moment, we lay there as we always had, on our backs, staring at the ceiling. But this time, it was different. I could feel the magnetic pull between us, a force that no longer needed to be resisted. I rolled onto my side to face him. A second later, he did the same. In the dim light, I could see his face clearly. The conflict was still there, but it was softer now, overlaid with a kind of weary surrender. I meant what I said, he whispered into the darkness. I don't know what to do. You don't have to, I whispered back. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We just have to be here. I reached out my hand, palm up, on the mattress between us. A silent invitation. He looked at my hand, then back at my face. He slowly placed his hand in mine, our fingers lacing together. His hand was so much larger than mine, his grip firm and warm. It felt right. It felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving had just clicked into place. Alex, he said, his voice thick. I think I'm falling in love with you. The confession, spoken so plainly, so vulnerably, into the quiet of the room, was everything. It was the release of a breath I had been holding for 7 years. Tears pricked at my eyes, not of sadness, but of a relief so profound it felt like my entire body was letting go of a tension I had carried for a decade. I said, my voice choked with emotion. I've been in love with you for a very long time. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his temple into his hair. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. He didn't pull away. He just held my hand there, against his mouth, and closed his eyes. He didn't need to say anything else. In that moment, the future, San Francisco, the job, the distance, all of it faded away. The only thing that was real was the weight of his hand in mine, the warmth of his breath on my skin, the quiet, certain peace that was settling in the room around us. He shifted closer, closing the last bit of space between our bodies, and for the first time, we were not just sharing a bed. We were holding each other. His arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against his chest, and I rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder. His chin came to rest on the top of my head. It was a perfect fit. It felt like the end of a long journey. I didn't know what would happen in 5 days. I didn't know if he would get on that plane. But as I lay there, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart under my ear, I knew that something fundamental had been realigned. The image that had been developing for so long was finally clear. It wasn't a picture of loneliness or unrequited love. It was a picture of two people finally finding their way home, in the beautiful, honest silence they had learned to create together. The door to the bedroom was closed, and for the first time, it felt like we were both on the same side of it. We were no longer the storm and the ocean, or the observer and the subject. We were just Alex and Liam. And that, I was beginning to understand, was more than enough. It was everything.